I think this conference today is even more poignant in the sense of, yes, it is 50 years since the passage of the Equal Pay Act, but it's also taking time in a time when, you know, we are seeing just how undervalued women are, when we're seeing that women are doing the jobs that are absolutely essential to our economy, absolutely essential to society, and yet getting paid so little. I mean, we always run a CEO pay tracker each year, and this year we found that the average FTSE CEO earns 186 times the amount of a carer, and that just really puts it into perspective. So I'd like to think that this event is part of our contribution to the current debate on how we value those who are doing the essential jobs, about what women are doing. And also, you know, it's really adding insult to injury to say that women aren't even getting paid equal to their male counterparts for work of for equal work or work of equal value. I'm going to give a very quick overview. We're going to have a plenary, and then we're going to have a break. I think we've all suffered from over enthusiastic Zoom calls over the last couple of weeks, so we're going to have a break. Then we're going to have a panel discussion on what's next. Sorry, then we're going to have breakout rooms that will be facilitated. And again, Rihanna's mentioned, you know, please do be respectful in these breakout rooms. I'm sure everybody will be. Then we're going to have a panel discussion and a keynote address as well. And I'm not going to go through the speakers because we have, you know, an amazing array of speakers here. And I'm really delighted that we had so many people that were willing to speak that we were then encouraged to ask people to be facilitators so that we could fit everybody in. And I think that's a really great representation of the sector, and also of the fact that this is such a key and pressing issue. So I'm going to quickly just run through the key highlights of the report, or should I say the lowlights of our report that was released today. So we released a report last year called From Pin Money to Fat Cats. And I think one of the key things that we're trying to raise is the fact that although 50 years now after the passage of the Equal Pay Act, we think that many companies obviously are still, unfortunately, not paying women equally as men. We can see that there are high risk factors. We know those. We know the EHRC has done work on this. We know that the financial sector is particularly bad when it comes to this. And looking at our report, we can see that the top 10 FTSE 100 companies for worst pay gaps, their gender pay gaps are all over 40%. When we turn to the bonus pay gaps, they are all, the top 10 worst offenders all have bonus gaps of over 75%. Now, if the FTSE 100 gender pay gap moved at the rate in which it's closing, you know, from last year to this year, for those who've reported, then on the basis of that change, it would take 200 years for the FTSE 100 companies to eliminate their gender pay gap. Now, these are supposed to be the leading UK companies, so really we must ask, if they can't get it right, who can? But we are engaging with a lot of the FTSE, and we are talking to those who are willing to see how we can work together to make sure that it's not 200 years and that we're not sitting here in 10 years' time still asking ourselves why the gender pay gap is so large and why we still don't have equal pay. And one of the key points of the report is that we are calling for pay transparency. We're calling for all pay structures to be transparent, and that would mean that workers would be able to see what the pay scales are. And, you know, I've worked in many organisations where there's been pay transparency and it hasn't been a big deal. So, what we say is, if you insist on pay secrecy, then really, what are you trying to hide? So we'd like you obviously to enjoy this conference today. We hope that, you know, it will stimulate a lot of thought. Obviously, this is a conference that we've put on with staff time and effort, and although it is free, we would appreciate a donation if you feel you're able to do that, because, you know, these things do have costs as well. And we'd like you to sign up to our newsletter. We've put a link in the chat to our donation page. And more importantly, we'd like you to tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell the people you work with about these issues and what you've learned today, so that we can spread the word and we can build the campaign for equal pay. this is part of a series of webinars and conferences that we're holding this year. So we'd also like you to sign up to the newsletter so you can see when the next events are. And with that, I'd like to say thank you so much. Please enjoy the conference today. Do give us feedback, because we're all at quite an early stage with this. So constructive feedback is really welcome, so that we can make these events better in the future. So I'd like to hand over now. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce our plenary speakers now for the first panel. We have 4 very distinguished speakers coming up, and they're all offering their perspectives on really the last 50 years of women fighting for equal pay, what the drivers of unequal pay have been, and what they see as the solutions and the way forward. So our first speaker is Professor Geraldine Healy. Geraldine joined Queen Mary University of London in 2004 as Professor of Employment Relations, and she's the founding director of the Centre for Research and Equality. She was previously Professor of Employment Relations at the University of Hertfordshire, where she was also the director of the Centre for Research in Employment Studies. Her research has focused around inequalities in employment and the workplace. Her recent work centering on gender and intersectional pay gaps and the organisation of casualised women workers. Geraldine's going to be opening today's discussion, setting the scene for us, as she is a massive expert in this area and really the best person to talk to for an overview of what's going on. She's going to be setting the scene, introducing the challenges that women face in the economy and at work, looking at how this has changed and what really the challenge for us ahead is. So I will pass over to Geraldine.
I'd like to begin by just saying how shocking it is that it's 50 years since the Equal Pay Act, and we're still here today campaigning on equal pay or seeking to get it. Before the Equal Pay Act came into force, women could legally be paid a different rate to men. Indeed, they could be paid a woman's rate. That was perfectly legal. But I'd like to mention to you today an exception to this, and one that's very close to my heart, and it's my mother. My mother, 60, 70 years ago, got equal pay. So how did that come about, and what can we learn from it? My mother was an Irish immigrant. She worked for Birmingham City Transport as a conductor and received equal pay. It was a tough job, but she also had to bring up a child on her own. And she knew that the pay that the average woman, low-skilled worker got was very low. Why did she get the same pay as her male colleagues? The rate was determined through collective bargaining by the Transport and General Workers Union. Part of Diana's work union, the Unite Union. Well, was the union ahead of its time? Were they really pro-women? No, not at all. They were defending men. They were defending the men's wage, which began when women started to work on the buses in the war. And the men were concerned that the women would take the men's jobs if they were paid a lower rate, because the employer would prefer to pay a lower rate than a higher rate. So they ensured that women got the same rate as men. Now that's really important. It was important for women who worked on the buses. It was also very important for the Caribbean workers and the South Asian workers who were recruited to work on the buses. They too got the same pay as their white male colleagues. And a few years later, my mother was approached by a union representative to ask her to join the pension scheme, which she did after serious thought, because of course she had to contribute. And it prevented her being part of the massive group of women who experience a pensions pay gap. It's some 39%, a higher rate than the European average, 39% pensions pay gap. It's no wonder that many women find themselves in poverty in old age. So what can we learn from my mother's experience? Well, the first thing, of course, is that she worked in a male-dominated area. And we know when in male-dominated areas, women get paid more. And we've seen this illustrated so many times that when women are separated from men, their pay is reduced. The most famous case, of course, was the Ford sewing machinists, who were considered less skilled than their male assembly line workers. These women went on strike in order to challenge their position on the pay grade. And of course, this became a very famous strike, which was attributed to ultimately leading to the Equal Pay Act, and of course is now a well-known film, as you no doubt know. The second point we can learn from my mother's experience is the role of unions. It was collective bargaining that ensured that men and women were paid the same after the war as well as during the war. And it ensured that the ethnicity pay gap in that occupation for that particular job was not there. So while the union's aim was to protect men's work, it also worked in women and migrants' interests. The problem, of course, is that women and men are often separated horizontally and vertically. They do different work. And we have seen that, and that was something that my mother knew. She worked in domestic service and catering when she came to this country first. And we know they are some of the lowest paid workers, and it's women's work. It's also the case that there's vertical segregation. Men dominate the hierarchies. So the cases that Wanda mentioned at the beginning are very relevant here. Men dominate the hierarchies and get the highest pay. It applies to my sector, the university sector, and as Wanda mentioned, in banking, it's particularly pronounced. We have to ask, how is this allowed to continue? We have laws that require equal pay for work of equal value. But cases can take years to resolve and have a huge personal and psychological impact on women brave enough to take those cases. The current laws are complicated and difficult to navigate without support. The valuing of work is difficult and has an inbuilt gender bias. We have only to look at the discourse on care workers. Care workers in Britain today are deemed unskilled. Yet what is quite clear is that they are undervalued. Their work is deemed as women's work and therefore worth less. COVID-19 has highlighted the valuable and skilled work that care workers undertake. And in this current pandemic, the inherent dangers of that work when proper health and safety requirements are ignored. This reminds us of the 1889 match girls who went on strike for an increase in pay and better conditions. They worked for Bryant and May in the East End of London, where Queen Mary is situated. Their work was so dangerous that they got what was known as phossy jaw. That was effectively the rotting away of the jawbone due to the phosphorus use in the work process. Defenders of the legacy of the matchworkers' struggle continues today with the campaign to prevent the handing over of the graves of one of the leaders, Sarah Chapman. Today, work should not be dangerous. Since 1974, we've had the Health and Safety at Work Act. And yet we know in the current pandemic, it is not being adhered to at all. There's a serious disregard for the dangers in women's work. Now, we do have some policies that work to make pay more transparent, but they've not worked effectively. So I'd like to finish, because I've got my 1 minute warning, on the challenges. What do we need to do? Well, we need a means to remove pay secrecy. It's absolutely essential. Pay is not secret in Norway, and it is a more equal society. We need to remove the requirement to give your current salary in new applications to avoid a reproduction of the unfair pay gap. It works in some US states. Why not here? We need to simplify equal pay legislation and bring back the pay questionnaire removed by the current government. Equal pay benefits society, not just women. So we need to ensure we don't get another public sector pay freeze, which will disproportionately affect women. And we need to ensure that we don't just clap for key care workers, but we need to pay them better. And that's in the climate of the being affected by immigration laws. And quickly, the government did an about turn on the requirement for international workers to reduce their contribution to the NHS. So more needs to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. It seems odd that we can't give you a round of applause, but that's the Thank you so much. That was a great overview and really current and really tagging on to all of the key themes that I think we're going to delve into in a bit more detail today. Thank you. Next up, we have Diana Holland, who is the Unite Assistant General Secretary for Equalities. She represents the union's 1.3 million members and is responsible industrially for the teams representing 250,000 transport and logistics members and for 100,000 members working in food, drink and agriculture. She has many years' experience as a union negotiator and representative on fair and equal pay, decent jobs, security, safety and dignity at work, as well as working on addressing underrepresentation of women, Black and Asian ethnic minorities, disabled and LGBT plus people, and the rights of migrant domestic workers, so a lot. Diana's going to be offering her perspective on the action taken by the trade union movement over the past 50 years and explore the challenges of the equal pay movement for trade unions, and just talk about why winning equal pay is still so difficult despite the law being in place for 50 years. So I will pass over to Diana now. Thank you.
I'm really pleased to be here, and I would first and foremost like to thank the Equality Trust for organising this. I think it's so important for us to come together, and just thinking today commemorating 50 years of equal pay law, meaning that all of us born before 1970, I'm included in that, were born into a world where it was absolutely lawful to pay men and women less, men and women differently, but women less, just because they were women. And I think it's not that long ago. And the legacy of that lives on in pay structures and workplaces today, in spite of the fact that it's 50 years on. So I wanted to begin, first of all, to say it has to be about celebration, because we have achieved a lot. Although it's 50 years of equal pay law, it's a hell of a lot longer of struggle for equal pay. And I think that it must be about celebration. It must be about celebration of the achievements of everybody. But of course, it can't just be about celebration. So I think the title is fantastic. 50 years is long enough, quite long enough. We should have equal pay. So I think that what I did want to make was 3 points at the outset. So first of all, equal pay goes hand in hand with fair pay. It's not right to just lower men's pay to deal with the equal pay issues. It's got to be about fair pay for all, and fair pay, transparency, and eliminating low pay and having a decent living wage as an absolute minimum for everybody. And we know that that makes a big difference. When the national minimum wage came in, 2/3 of those who benefited were women, and it closed the gender pay gap a full %. And similarly, when the national living wage, part of the national minimum wage, came in, it did the same. So we know that fair pay and equal pay must go hand in hand. Secondly, we know we just can't be complacent. Anybody who's been struggling on equality for any time at all knows, unfortunately, it's not always getting better. It gets worse as well. And we can go backwards, and we can't be complacent. Right now, we've got COVID-19, and the impact of that, we know, is already going to be threatening and undermining achievements on equality and equal pay included. We've got austerity that we had to struggle with, and that we still have the legacy of, and the approach of undermining everything that we're doing as well. So we cannot take for granted that things always move in a neat direction in terms of equal pay. And thirdly, as has been said already, and I wanted to obviously add my voice to that, trade unions have played an absolutely critical role in the movement towards equal pay. However, I'm never going to be complacent. I know there's going to be issues and there's things that we can do better. But I do know, as an absolute bottom line, trade unions have made a massive difference on equal pay. There was firstly a commitment to equal pay, however, in 1888, and in the trade union movement, and we still don't have it. So I'm more than aware of the struggle that we've got ahead of us. I think we're celebrating the women that have struggled and the men that have supported them. And so the Ford women machinists have already been mentioned, and I just wanted to say I've had the great privilege, because they are part of the union that I'm Assistant General Secretary for Equalities in, to meet them a number of times and to celebrate with them and to move things forward. And I just wanted to mention, firstly, they've always said this was about our skill. Our skill was not properly recognised. And I think that's something that underpins all of this. We've got to recognise the skills that go with undervalued work. And secondly, their message to women of today is never give up and stick with the union through thick and thin. And they had their criticisms, believe me. Speech therapists and language therapists played a big part. They're part of a legacy of Unite as well, MSF, which then became part of Amicus. And they tenaciously ensured that professions were properly able to be compared within the health service and that their skills were properly valued. Freeman's catalogues, there was a struggle there, which again was part of the T&G of, they tried to say they put a man in the role and that meant it was fine. The fact that most of those that were underpaid were women was, they said it's not a problem because we put a man working in there now, so just compare yourselves with him. That was found to be unacceptable under equal pay law. And I was part of the struggle with the Vauxhall women who followed the Ford women as part of our car industry campaign. And that struggle taught me so much. We learned there that as well as the grades that they had for skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled, they had a W grade. And it was a very enlightening moment in the tribunal where the former HR director said that W had nothing to do with women. However, there were no women on any of the other grades and only women on the W grade. It was very clear what had been going on there. And women in the NHS and local government have played a huge part as well. So I wanted to just highlight some of the barriers we're still up against today. There's a view that equal pay and women's equality is sorted, and so we need to move on. Of course, we've got to be aware of the diversity of women and the impact of race discrimination and all other forms of discrimination. But it's really important that we don't underestimate the importance of dealing with equal pay. It's of course cheaper to undervalue and underpay women workers. And finally, there's just a lack of awareness and understanding of what equal pay and equal value are actually about. In spite of the fact that equal pay law has been with us for 50 years and equal value law for, well, it came in the 80s, so it's a long time too. So no equal pay problem in my workplace. It was one of the most common things that I came across. And so people said, no women work there, men and women doing the same job get paid the same. Most women are on the lowest grades, most men are graded higher, most part-time workers are women, and take-home pay is generally higher for men, even if the basic hourly rate's the same. So the three options for the employer: to ignore it, to hope no one raises it, get involved in equal pay legal cases, or carry out an equal pay audit. And that's what we think is needed. The time for just measuring the gender pay gap, important though it is in the current legislation, is just not enough. We have to close it. So my final message is we've got to tackle complacency and raise awareness. We've got to have recognition that unequal pay is structural and collective. We've got to make sure that we have sectoral collective bargaining and rights for union equality reps. That could make a huge difference. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Diana. That was a really great overview. Like you said, it's important today to celebrate the wins that we have achieved and made, particularly through collective bargaining, as you say, while we also, think about what we need to do going forwards. And I really like the fact that you fitted the discussion into the wider discussion on low pay and value, which, yeah, I think quite a lot of the speakers coming up are also going to be drawing on as well, and the fact that equal pay audits are a really key tool in actually resolving the problem. So that's brilliant. Thank you, Diana. Next up, we have Dame Moya Greene. Moya Greene was CEO of the Royal Mail Group for 8 years from 2010 onwards. She was recruited to effect a wholesale transformation for the business and the implementation of a new strategy designed to attract private sector investors, and she oversaw the privatisation of the company in 2013. Prior to joining Royal Mail, Moya was the CEO of Canada Post for 5 years, and she also has a strong public sector background, developed over a 17-year period when she assumed progressively senior roles in 7 different ministries of the Canadian Federal Public Service. She is now an independent non-executive director of EasyJet, a trustee of the Tate Gallery, and last year she launched the MeTooPay campaign, which aims to end pay discrimination and close the gender pay gap, and was backed by 100 of the UK's most successful businesswomen. So Dame Moya is going to be talking about her views on how far businesses have come in limiting unequal pay practices since women legally won the right to equal pay. Sorry, reading off a page is so hard today. And what is it that is actually holding companies back from making the significant progress that it's needed? So thank you, Dame Moya. I'll pass over to you.
This is a time for celebration. I agree with the illustrious speakers that have, very practically mentioned that, while there's still a great deal to do, we have made a lot of progress. And I think the trade union movement deserves a lot of credit, but it is the character and of women, great women, who have pressed their case for better treatment, fair treatment, particularly in matters pertaining to compensation. I really believe now, looking back, that women are going to have to fight for this. And if we're going to take a significant leap forward in actually, in a material way, reducing that gender pay gap, women are going to have to fight, and they're going to have to get organized for the fight. And because to take single cases to employment tribunals, these are just so difficult. They take years, they're very costly, they're long, lonely fights. And so after a lot of reading and thinking and taking the views of many experts in this field, I've now come to the conclusion that it's going to be really important for women to organize and to support each other and to fight. None of these rights, any aspect of anti-discrimination, none of it has come about except through challenge and organized fight. And I think that's true today as well. And nothing is going to be easy. I think transparency is a great tool. If you help people see what the differences in pay inside a corporation or in a whole sector are, that at least makes room for a debate and a discussion and a better understanding of why those differences persist. Well, pay reporting was important because it at least put the topic on the board table. It put the topic on the executive management table, and it made the discussion a real live discussion. I see now, I read in the newspaper today that, one of the many things that the COVID crisis has allowed is that we don't have gender pay reporting this year. So we really need to get that back, because that's it's not a panacea, but it at least opened the door to changing the agenda, to making the discussion, to keeping it alive, making the debate real. And so that's the second thing, and we're going to have to fight for that, because There are lots of regulatory reporting requirements in many, many areas, and companies will always say that the reporting requirements are too voluminous and they're too difficult. Well, isn't it too bad that the first thing that got dropped was gender pay reporting and the transparency that comes along with it, and the good provocation of debate and discussion that is, I think, a precursor to change. So the first thing is women are going to have to fight, and they're going to have to organize and support each other. And the second thing is they're going to have the kind of information that is possible with gender pay reporting, and they need more information. I don't think that we can rely simply on one lonely woman taking these fights like Samira Ahmed did, like Stacey Mackin did, like Sam did. I think we have to be more organized now and take these fights in for bigger groups of women. On the issue of why women's work is so poorly paid and so undervalued, you know, this has been a problem from time immemorial. And again, the trade union movement has really helped in the post-war period to get this undervaluation reduced, but it still persists. And women are some of the lowest paid in our society. And again, we are going to have to fight and be organized to get that changed. One positive thing that I think this pandemic may have done is it has put in very, very sharp focus, very high relief, just how valuable this work actually is. And maybe now, in addition to clapping and remarking how valuable it is, we can start the processes to start to pay people in care homes, people in hospitals, people who are delivering and checking out and our food for us. We can start to pay these people more. So my message today is, yes, a lot has been done, and many organizations in society can take a lot of credit. Professors like Geraldine, union organizers like Diana. But if we are going to really take a leap forward in the year 2020, I think we need two things: women to organize and fight and support each other. And secondly, we need a lot more transparency. We need to know what are people being paid so that you can at least identify there's a problem. Pay audits will help, but it can't stop with pay audits. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Moya. That was brilliant. I think, yeah, you touched on transparency, which I think is definitely a central issue here. And like you said, women supporting each other and holding each other up to make sure that we win the fight. That's really brilliant. Thank you so much. Our final speaker for the plenary discussion this morning is Hilary Wainwright. Hilary is a founding editor of Red Pepper, which is a feminist, socialist and green magazine and website, which is celebrating its 25th birthday this year. She's a fellow of the Transnational Institute and an honorary research associate of the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. Hilary was active in the women's liberation movement in the 1970s and attended its first conference 50 years ago. Some of her recent writing includes the books Beyond the Fragments, Feminism and the Making of Socialism, and her latest release, A New Politics from the Left. Hilary is going to offer her perspective on women's expectations at work 50 years ago compared to now, and explore how and if the way women's work is valued has changed over time. And she's also going to act as a bit of discussant for the day and offer her reflections on some of the previous panelists' contributions. So I'll pass over to Hilary. Thank you.
Hi everybody, and thanks very, very much, Rihanna, and for all your very efficient organising, and Wanda too for initiating this whole thing. And really, as everybody else has said, congratulations on the importance of this, on doing this at such an important moment. And it's interesting, as Dame Moya said, that today, you know, you open the paper and one of the headlines is "Falling Gender Gap Pay Reporting Threatens to Erode Equality." And it's like, you know, almost every day there are statements of that kind. We've advanced in many ways. Actually, there's a deep reluctance on the part of men to actually concede equal pay. And I mean, that's true of the Dagenham women, because actually the reality is that although they did, you know, win an important measure of equality, and of course, you know, they led the Equal Pay Act, actually they had to wait 16 years before their skill was recognised. So although it was about pay, it was also about recognition, and actually recognition of them as skilled workers, and that didn't come for 16 years. So there's always this sort of slowness, and I really agree with the previous speakers. One on the importance of organising, and that means both the trade union organising, as we saw in Dagenham, and Diane has been part of maintaining and expanding and deepening and strengthening that tradition of organisation. But also within the community and within society more generally, as was the case with the women's movement at the time in the 70s. I mean, I remember, I think it was one of my first demonstrations, going to the demonstration for equal pay, backing the Dagenham women, but also trying to push the legislative agenda. I think also this question of value, and explaining why women's work isn't valued. I remember there was a cartoon in the early days of the women's movement where, I won't describe the cartoon exactly, but the words were equality, and the woman says, well, actually, we had something better in mind. And I think that's because actually the roots of inequality in the case of women and their undervaluing actually points to deeper structural problems than not merely, but than only the relations in the workplace. You know, it's a lot to do with the nature of the sexual division of labour in society, and the fact that so much work concerned with reproduction of life, reproduction of people's capacity to work, you know, actually rests not only with women, but in the sphere of the household, the private sphere. So in a society that's dominated by money and work is valued according to money and wages, then that work in the home, done on the basis of personal relationships, is not valued. It's not seen as work. I mean, one of the, I think, distinctive sort of arguments and struggles of that women's movement in the 70s, which is still, this is part of the debate and part of the argument amongst feminists now, is the importance of what we call domestic labour as labour. And you know, there's a big debate about how that should be recognised, whether it should be wages for housework, or many of us stressed more the issue of socialising and reorganising domestic labour, whether it's to do with sharing it in the household, which means has got a lot of implications for shorter working weeks, a changing in the nature of waged work, as well as the reorganisation of domestic work, or whether it's to do with more social provision, childcare, and so on. And I think that actually this crisis, you know, in so many ways, and ways that the other speakers have stressed, revealed so much about the underpinning inequality. And I think in relation to women in particular, I think this whole issue of the schools and the pressure from the government to get to schools going again. I mean, everybody, you know, understands the need for kids to be back at school. But on the other hand, there's so many issues of safety and so on. But the pressure from the economy, as it were, from government, shows that on the one hand, the economy depends hugely on the work of women, often undervalued and underpaid. But on the other hand, society also depends on their private role in the care of children. So we have a crisis that reveals the reality. And it's also an opportunity because in a way, this crisis has been about the tension between the needs of the economy, the needs of production and the making of profit. And on the other hand, the needs of health, the needs of care, the needs of personal and family and neighbourly and community security. And so this is an opportunity to attempt to revalue and reprioritize the needs of society, the needs of safety, the needs of care, the needs of children, and the needs of women. So I think this is a moment when, in a way, both strength and organisation in the workplace, and there we've got to recognise the difficulties of increased precarity, and the defeat of many parts of the trade union movement, and with that the ways in which employers have exploited that weakness to impose short-term contracts, zero-hour contracts, and all the insecurity that now is common, particularly for young people. So it's encouraging to see the trade union movement and particularly younger activists attempting to build new forms of trade unionism that address that precarity. And unions like Unite and Unison have begun to respond to that. And the Bakers Union, I think, has been particularly good to work with those new forms of organisation, which I think are crucial and often are led by women, because often they're taking place in spheres like restaurants, not restaurants, but McDonald's and Wetherspoons and so on, where it's been women's labour that's been exploited. So there are many new frontiers of organisation. So Dame Moya's, everybody's stress on getting organised, that tribunals and individual women, who've done great things, but it's not enough. We have to be organised, and we have to be organised in new ways. So while we need the trade union movement as it's been built up over the years, but we also need to work with it to adapt, to be nimble and effective in reaching out to the more dispersed, more precarious workers. So I hope this seminar will help to stimulate that and to link with, in a way, we need, I think, given the division, sexual division of labour, we need struggles on every front in the workplace and in the community for better provision, particularly for childcare, and to recognise the importance of domestic labour as being an essential part of the economy, and a part that needs to be reorganised if women are to be truly emancipated and self-liberated. Thanks.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Hilary. It was really good for you to give the sort of wider context of the fact that the economy is basically built on women's unpaid care and labour. So I think that was a really fantastic sort of introduction to that sort of aspect of things. So that's really brilliant. I can see that there is a fantastic little discussion happening in the chat box, which is great, because just in time we are about to head into our discussion groups. So there are a number of facilitators who have been briefed in advance. Some of them will be giving a 5-minute introduction to the themes that have been brought up so far from their perspective. So some of them may be looking at the ethnicity pay gap. Some of them may be talking about the gender pay gap specifically. Some of them may be talking about equal pay from the perspective of their union's organising work. So it's going to be a different range of things, and everyone's going to be talking about different stuff. We're going to go to those breakout groups in a minute, and everyone is going to be coming back at 11:20. So you'll have around 25 minutes in total. when you get put into your breakout groups, please remember to put your microphone on so that everyone can hear you. And once we're back in the rooms, back in the main room at 11:20, we're going to take a short break, after which we'll do the feedback discussions from those breakouts. So my colleague Angela will be putting you into breakouts now.
Okay, well, welcome back. So now we're just going to do a quick report back from the group discussions that you guys just had. I'm going to call each individual facilitator for the different groups and give you about 2 minutes, and I will send you a message when you've got about 30 seconds. Sorry, I know it's quite brief, but there are a fair few groups, and I'm sure 1 or 2 of you will go a little bit over, but hopefully not. So if I can please ask for Victoria Jones. Are you there? Would you like to?
I am indeed. Yeah. Hi,
Amazing.
thanks so much. Hi. 2 minutes, right. I've written a list down, so I'll rattle through it. So we talked about how we learned a lot in the plenary sessions. We were particularly interested in the impact of the introduction and the impact that it had on women. We also thought the comments around how women working with men receive higher pay compared to women. Oh, it says I'm muted, but I'm not sure if I am.
You are, sorry, that was me, sorry.
No problem. Don't take that off my time. We also thought the comments about how women working with men receive higher pay compared to women working in sectors that are predominantly seen as women's work was really interesting. We felt really strongly about the impact of austerity on women and the need to avoid another round of that. We had a great academic in our group who shared her insight on pay communication and the language used in the accompanying narrative of pay gap reporting. She pointed out the mansplaining, and someone used the term window dressing inequality, which I loved. Well, not loved, but you get the point. We talked about the impact of the pandemic and the need to revalue the work women do, because we felt that currently women are at the bottom of the value chain. We thought about how we'd need to overturn the structures that hold us down. We talked about the need to be collective and the roles of unions in funding challenges through the court system, and the help that unions can give when navigating the process, which can be such a barrier. They also indulged me while I banged on about the need for women in senior union roles to ensure that equal pay is prioritised at a senior level and funded properly. We talked about the need for data and the excellent Fawcett Society campaign around the right to know, which we were all supportive of. And finally, we talked about the challenge of raising an equal pay issue and not wanting it to negatively impact your career. We had quite a good conversation around that, but also the impact of women's personal lives and their career decisions. And we had a fantastic woman in our group called Leslie McNiven, who is writing what sounds like an excellent graphic novel around this. So a bit of a plug for Leslie as well. So yeah, a great group. They indulged me in my rants, and it was just really great to speak to them. So thank you, everyone.
Amazing, thanks so much for that report back. Can I please find Ian?
Yes.
Ian Manford.
That's great, Angela. Thank you very much. And just first of all, thank you very much to the colleagues in my group for the fantastic discussion that we had. There's 4 key points that I just want to go over, kind of just summarise this, just starting off with the point that Alexia and our group made about the importance of legal action and the sanctions that can follow from that. I couldn't agree more, certainly from a trade union point of view, that on the route to achieving collective bargaining, the pressure of legal action is often a necessity. And in the Samira Ahmed case, it was so important to set that standard with regards to a large employer like the BBC. A point that Opie made, which I agree with very much, was about changing the narrative, sometimes needed to change the narrative and adopt one where employers feel it's confrontational in some way or just won't engage, and just to consider ways to use a Trojan horse around different standards. The particular example that I used from Equity, the union that I work for, is our current discussions with UK broadcasters have been very much influenced by the improved diverse approach of Netflix and other video on demand providers. If the broadcasters understand anything, it's the fact that their declining share of viewers needs to be arrested in some way, and it can be if we use the argument of the power of Netflix. A point that Maria made was around the importance of data and the transparency of data as well. Many of the arguments that we use in trade union work in particular rests on our arguments for simple fairness, but it has to be backed up by very clear authoritative data, both around pay, but also around issues to do with skills. So I really welcome that point. And then very lastly, the same point, but from two different perspectives. Rachael from the RCN talked about the issue of visibility of women, very much like Victoria's point about COVID, and the peculiarity of how in a situation where you're talking about a workforce that's predominantly female in the healthcare sector, where so few women have been seen to lead the perspective on what work is like in the NHS currently. I think we'd all agree that too many of the spokespeople on the health perspectives of COVID have been male. And on a similar point, a kind of connected point, Bea referred to, nearly there, Rachael, the invisibility of women, particularly in my sector. Sorry, Rachael, I thought it was going to be quicker. I was sure it would be less than 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. And for sure, feel free to share anything else in the chat box as people are doing, and not just for facilitators, but for people in the rooms. You know, this is really a live discussion we want to be having. Can I please get Tom Schuller, please?
Yes, thanks. Thank you to my colleagues, and I'm sorry, I don't think I managed the time too well on our group. But our main emphasis was on the transparency issue and information, to say how important that is, but with, I think, 3 real points around that. The first is that data on its own is not enough, and that the whole movement on gender pay gap data needs to be accompanied by action plans, and that's a sort of negotiating point and a point of follow-up in any discussions with organizations. Secondly, though, that often the data is not actually appropriate. It doesn't match up with the real issues involved. So we need to keep a very close eye on whether the data is really the best kind of data and actually addresses the issues that need to be addressed. So whether there's structural issues vary a lot, and we need to make sure the data is right. And the third point is that you can have bureaucracies in place. You can have HR people, and Stefan told us that the BBC has 500 people in its HR department. You can have evaluation units, but they do not guarantee that progress is actually going to be made. And then I think the last point, which also relates to information, is interesting about choice and occupational choice, that often young people, and I don't think this only applies to young people, are not getting good information about careers and the opportunities that are involved there. So those are from our group.
Thanks so much. Sharia? I'm sorry if I said your name wrong.
Oh no, it's perfect, Shira. Yes.
Shira.
Yeah, so we talked about finding practical solutions around transparency of the pay gap, so less secrecy. So how can we close those gaps? We talked about how exhausting and the physiological aspects of these conversations, having to constantly talk about the need for this and why we need to have these conversations. We also talked about the social structures that are already in place that make it difficult for women. And we talked about majority of pay conversations and pay rises and promotions. They actually sometimes happen in the pub after work. And if you've got caring needs to run off to, you're missing out in the office the next morning. So all those opportunities they're not fair. We talked about the current crisis. COVID's got a lot of us working from home, parents, and if that was normality, and if employers had trust, and we were able to manage care needs and everything else, it's better for the employer, for society in general. You get staff retention, people want to stay with you. We also talked about creating social diversity is key. We also talked about how can we were looking at like people on the faces of this call, and how can we get maybe somebody younger on this call who might not be having these conversations. What do we need to get them on board? So we looked at some viral campaigns that came about last year on Facebook. It was about buying drinks in a pub, and the men were asked to pay 30% more, and they were looking at their reactions and shocked why, and looking at the gender pay gap. That was really good. So and finishing off, we talked about just rising up together. It's not a single issue. We all need to come together to talk about some of this.
Thanks so much. And next we've got Rachael and or Martin from Share Action. I'm not sure which one of you guys want to report back.
Yeah, I'll report back, I think. So thank you to everyone in my group. We sort of spoke about how low pay and insecure work is also a gendered issue, and sort of also the business case for, as well as the moral case for tackling these issues, and how we can sort of use that to drive change. So we spoke a little bit about Share Action. We spoke about levers of change, and Share Action's lever of change of using the investments and getting investors to push for change in their companies. We also explored what other levers of change could be, and we spoke about how clients and customers could be a potential lever for change if they don't want to purchase from companies with reputation issues because of gender discrimination in pay. But we also spoke about how workers must be consulted for there to be any change to ensure that the change is what the worker wants. And then we sort of had a discussion on both these points, sort of how much it is up to the individual, especially when that individual may not be in the position to push for their change, and how it needs to be a collective effort on part of different stakeholders. And then we also spoke not so much of lever of change, but sort of about the importance of childcare and how having a better childcare system would be really important and allow more change in this area. Thank you.
Great, thanks Rachael. Next we've got Paul Day from PDA.
Yes, hi, thank you. And I'm good. Yes, thank you, and thank you to colleagues in my breakout group. We had a great chat. Echoes of what some other colleagues have already said. I mean, we talked about unequal pay is not an issue, it's a symptom, and actually it's a wider, unfairer society, sexist society, and so, you know, we need to look at the wider causes, but quite how you do that, you get a sense it's perhaps getting better, but you know, my entire life it's been unlawful to have unequal pay, and yet it still happens. So, you know, we recognise it's a slow-moving thing, and that I think led us to talk about different periods of time, and you've got to look at the governments that you've got in place, because there will be some governments where you've got a chance of perhaps legislation to help step change. But with perhaps the current government, we have to think more about litigation to actually apply the laws we've currently got to try and cause step change. So strategies and tactics on what is sadly a multi-decade long campaign, different periods of government might need different approaches. So that was a strong aspect. As other groups have said, a big part of this is about the difference coming from women and childcare, and actually the ability to support parental responsibilities being easier to achieve in society would help to break down some of the causes. Because if it's easier for men and women to be parents and to take their turn in their childcare and bringing up a family, that would be a lot easier. But more practical things, if we could get bans on bans, that is to stop employers restricting people from talking about pay, and then an idea which for complete transparency comes from myself is cut out the employer. Why not just make all tax returns public, and then everyone would know what everybody else earned. Step change. But there you go, that's the votes of the Norwegian jury.
Amazing, thanks so much. Okay, next we've got Kim and Jamal from the Triple Cripples.
Oh, yes. Hello. Hi, everyone. We had a wonderful group while we were facilitating, as we are the Triple Cripples, and we discussed the intersections of race, gender, and ability in highlighting those particular narratives. We pointed out how important it is to include different kinds of women and women that live at these different intersections and so many others. Excuse me, and highlight the necessity that when we are looking at the gender pay gap, we cannot just look at it with a broad brushstroke. There are women that are disabled that are being paid less. There are women that are Black that are being paid less. There are disabled Black women that are being paid less. There are those that are being paid less for being at different intersections. And we raise that with the group, and noting the importance of actually centering these particular narratives to ensure that we are building from the ground up, and making sure that when we are discussing the needs of gender equality for women, we're including disabled women, we're including women of color, we're including trans women in these discussions as well, because that's the only way that women will actually be able to reach true equality or true equity.
Yeah, and some of the issues raised by the group were kind of looking at, okay, so how do we implement these things? What do you think about, the only word I use for it is quotas, in terms of getting more diversity and having a targeted program for that. They also talked about the idea of cultural shift, and especially focus on disability and the way in which we engage differently with working, and incorporating like a cultural shift that will view everybody as worthy, and see them as worthy of contribution, but also worthy of remuneration, whatever type of job they do. Also the idea of organizing others and communicating to others the importance or the differences that do exist, the inequities that do exist. And so working within, okay, patriarchy means that a lot of people who are affected by patriarchy don't even realize that they are, affected. They're so used to being paid unequally that sometimes if you are an activist in the space and you're going and saying, look, let's organize women, they don't necessarily think that they need to. They're comfortable, they're happy, because that's what they're used to. And so it's working out, okay, so how do we reach those people? How do I interact? How do I start things in my workplace? And we also talked about the things that you can do practically within your space, within your life, to make those changes, as opposed to waiting for just giant movements. Like, what can you do on an individual level to affect change? And where can you utilize your privilege to do those things? So it was quite an interesting discussion.
Thank you so much for that report back. Sian Elliott from the TUC.
Hi. I had another great group. I really enjoyed discussing all of these issues with the brilliant women that were in my breakout group. We talked a lot about how at the moment the burden is really on the individual and on the woman to challenge what are structural and systemic inequalities. And so we had a brief discussion about pay transparency, that 1 in 5 workers are subject to a pay clause, but also there was a suggestion around actually salaries on job adverts are often missing, and so that allows pay inequalities to be imported from one workplace to another. So we would like to see an end on pay secrecy clauses, but also a requirement to put pay and salary onto job advertisements so that women aren't penalised for pay discrimination. We talked about the fact that where there are shown to be pay gaps, that at the moment the onus is on the individual, again, to demonstrate that there's wrongdoing, to take forward an individual employment tribunal case. And actually there was a really good suggestion that we have to completely shift that. It has to be, the onus has to be on the employer to prove that they are not discriminating against women where there are found to be equal pay issues, rather than the individual having to demonstrate that there is wrongdoing. And we think that's where a kind of root and branch review of the Equal Pay Act and the law around it could really be looking at a much more preventative approach with the onus on the employer. We talked about, very similar to the other groups, that this pay inequality is symptomatic of a sexist, racist society that does not value disabled women, BAME women. And so we talked about the need for an intersectional approach to looking at pay inequality. You cannot get rid of equal pay issues for women without looking at ethnicity pay gaps, disability pay gaps. So we want to see the regulations around pay gap reporting strengthened to include both of those pay gap issues. We want to see employers producing a narrative so that they can prove to us they've actually understood and analysed why they have pay gaps and where they exist, and then publishing an action plan so that trade unions and workers can hold them to account for the action that they take or do not take in order to close those pay gaps. We talked about the fact that there is a huge motherhood penalty and that equal pay issues really, really grow exponentially for women at that point. So we wanted to see an equalising of caring responsibilities, so a much longer period of paid leave for fathers, so that from the very beginning, women and men are sharing care responsibly, or those in same-sex households, and it isn't that lower earner that loses their time, that is forced to take time out of the workplace or to reduce their hours, because we know that's where a lot of women then are forced into low-paid part-time work.
Thank you so much, Sian. I'm going to have to move on, but please do share any other points in the chat, because we'll be saving all of this before the meeting ends. Can I please have Professor Jane Holgate join us to do a report back?
Thanks very much, Angela. Again, thanks to the contributors in our discussion group. Again, we focus mainly on transparency in pay, thinking this is one of the key issues. The fact that, you know, there's so much secrecy in pay stops us really understanding what's going on with our colleagues in terms of pay. So in that sense, although it's good to have it, you know, maybe, you know, the government at some point would introduce legislation to you know, to give us an understanding of pay transparency across the board. We think it's important at the local level for that to take place. So that was a discussion. We also discussed about whether this should be voluntary or regulatory in terms of pay transparency. We talked about the living wage campaign and how that was so successful on a voluntary level. And maybe we could think about ideas about why that was, thinking about it in terms of corporate social responsibility. Clearly there's a big debate to have about the extent to which, you know, employers will do things voluntary, but it's interesting that it did happen quite a lot within the living wage campaign, so maybe there's something we could learn from that in terms of campaigning. We also talked about the fact that you know, trade unions are doing a good job in terms of leading on equal pay issues, but we also noted that 75% or more of workers are not members of trade unions. So we talked about how to link, in order to build up our leverage, to link with community organisations and third sector organisations, if we could have a comprehensive campaign drawing on the expertise of the trade unions and some of the third sector groups, that we'd actually be much stronger if we were fighting this on a collective level as well. I think that actually covers a lot of the things, because other things have already been raised elsewhere, but we did also talk about the ethnic pay gap, and we can't look at the gender pay gap without the ethnic pay gap. So all that was part of the discussion that was taking place as well. We also had a discussion about the gender pay gap reporting, about how that had been suspended, and we're a little bit confused as to whether that's just for this year or it will have a knock-on effect next year, given the fact that people are not doing the work now, whether it might be that we lose 2 years of gender pay gap reporting. But I think the key message that came out from our group, I think, was on campaigning and collective bargaining, but much wider than that in terms of involving other organisations. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jane. And can I get Dr. Fenella Porter, please?
Yes, thank you. Again, we had an absolutely brilliant discussion, and thank you to everybody in the group for contributing such amazing experience and expertise. So we also, I think, covered a lot of the issues that have been covered by others, but we were started off by one of the sort of main framing ideas was brought by Moya, and the need for more equal pay to be seen as not just about individuals with this different skill sets, but to be seen structurally and as a consequence of structural inequalities, which are gendered but also racialized and class-based. So we wanted to see that as the kind of overall framing of the equal pay issue. But then we started talking more about levers of change. And one of the key ideas that came out of our group was that we need to get them young. We need to be starting this at schools. We need to be talking about it with young students. So we had people, young people like Morag in our group, but also Rachael, who spoke about some of the students that she works with, and Manuela as well, who also works with students. And ensuring that this is something that young people come out being prepared to challenge and to change with confidence, and the idea that valuing women's experience and work is something that people can do very, very easily. And we spoke about great role models such as Angela Rayner, who've come out and spoken about, you know, her experiences of inequality in work. We then thought about the importance of investing in the infrastructure of care that other people have spoke about, and reframing work so that flexible working is something that's considered normal. So Natalie brought the experience of school teachers for whom this is really quite a difficult issue, but one that's really needs to be considered as much more normal. So shared parental leave is part of that, but also I think taking advantage of the fact that everybody's work situations have been shaken up in the current context. And Sophie brought the experience of the Women's Equality Party into that as well. And finally, we spoke about transparency and the need, and examples such as Agenda for Change in the NHS to give the knowledge and confidence for people to negotiate equal pay.
Thank you so much. And there's been so many amazing points raised by all the groups. So I just want to thank everyone for participating. It seemed like they were all very fruitful discussions. I won't do a wrap up just because we are going to be running behind time. So I want to introduce Ian Manbrode, who you would have seen reporting back already as the chair for the next session. Ian's the Equality and Diversity Organiser at Equity, which is the trade union for creatives. So actors, singers, performers, directors, models. So Ian's going to be chairing the next session, which is What's Next for Equal Pay, which seems like a good place to go next. Ian, are you there?
I am, Angela. Thank you very much. And just before I start, a huge thanks to the Equality Trust for organising today's event on such an important and critically important theme. And thanks to all the colleagues at the Equality Trust for organising the event. I wouldn't know where to begin in organising a Zoom conference. I can just about organise the conventional one. So thank you all very much. So really pleased to be asked to chair on our next part of this session, which is 3 guest speakers focusing on what's next for equal pay. So the panel discussion will focus on action being taken right now by different groups to address gender pay inequality through legal action, trade union organising, and political advocacy, coupled with campaigning and research. We're going to have 3 speakers, 3 excellent speakers. Each will have 8 minutes. I will, on the chat box, I'll give each of the speaker a note when we've got a minute left, and if they're still overrunning, I'll just unmute and just remind them that we need to stick to time. So what I'd like to do then is move to our first speaker, and just bear with me just while I read from my notes, just to make sure that I get the introduction accurate. So I'd like to introduce Sam Smethers. Sam Smethers is the Chief Executive of the Fawcett Society. He took up her post in 2015. As you all probably know, the Fawcett Society is the UK's leading charity campaign for gender equality and women's rights. Prior to taking up her role as Chief Executive of the Fawcett Society, Sam was Chief Executive of Grandparents Plus, and has previously worked for the Equal Opportunities Commission, as well as working in Parliament for over 9 years. Sam is a trustee of Equally Ours and a director of the Goodwill Project. Sam will speak about the Fawcett Society's current political work on the parliamentary bill and the asks behind the Right to Know campaign. She will offer her opinion on what she sees as the future of the fight and what needs to be done by government and businesses, for example, to finally win equal pay for women, particularly in the context of COVID-19. Okay, thanks, Sam. Over to you.
Great. Now I'm unmuted. Great. Thanks very much, Ian. And I want to just echo the thanks and appreciation to Wanda and the Equality Trust team for organising this event. We've been in a similar position at Fawcett ourselves, organising a range of Zoom events over the last few weeks in the context of the COVID crisis. And, you know, it's amazing what you can do with a small team and a bit of will and determination to pull things together. But it's great to see so many people on the event as well. So I'm going to say a little bit about the right to know, but I think it's important that we also contextualise it with what is happening around us right now, because that's making quite a big difference, I think, both to what's happening to women in the workplace and to prospects for equality at work, but also the opportunity that that presents. And I think there are some real opportunities as well which are coming towards us, so we do need to be ready to sort of take advantage of them. But first, a bit about the right to know and kind of what we've been doing to campaign on that. So I suppose the reason we started campaigning for the right to know is because the closer we got to the legislation and looking at, you know, the Equal Pay Act itself, which, as we know, is obviously 50 years old, it seemed to us that it wasn't really working for women. So the law as it stands doesn't really deliver what we need it to deliver. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is that basic lack of transparency, which your report today highlights so well. So, you know, you can't fight for equality with something if you don't know what it is. You can't, you know, if you don't know what your male colleagues are earning, you're failing at the first hurdle, really. So that seemed to me to be a fundamental flaw in the legislation that we needed to address. Secondly, it's incredibly challenging for individual women to bring cases anyway. So the cost, the stress, the, you know, just the years that it takes sometimes to fight for equal pay. You know, and it's great if you've got your union by your side and supporting you, but a lot of women obviously don't have a trade union. Sometimes trade unions don't always support the cases, let's be honest. It's not like they give universal support. They'll be selective about the cases they support, and we get women coming to us with our Equal Pay Advice Service who've tried to get help from their trade union and haven't been able to. But it's just exhausting for individual women to fight these cases. Many of them prefer to settle and rather than conclude a case. It's just too difficult and challenging for them. And it's in the interest of the employer to spin the cases out and to make them last even longer. And so that's how you end up in the situation where a lot of women drop their claims or they don't succeed. So we wanted to do something to really modernise the law. We felt 50 years of the Equal Pay Act is the perfect time to modernise the law. So we pulled together a group of leading experts who looked at some detail at this and came up with this simple proposition of giving women an enforceable right to know, and it does have to be enforceable as well. So really what that is giving her access to pay information if she suspects pay discrimination in her workplace. It's not revealing everybody's salaries at that moment to everybody. It's not as wide-ranging as that. It's about the individual having access to pay information about a comparator. And that, again, that is how the equal pay legislation is an individual right to challenge based on a comparator in her workplace. Today we've had the news that Keir Starmer is backing that change in the law, which is really fantastic for us. We've obviously, in the context of COVID, not been able to campaign on it as hard as we'd wanted to in the last couple of months, but we started back with Equal Pay Day in November last year, publishing some new evidence, including demonstrating public support for a law change. And then when we asked women, well, do you know about whether what your colleagues are earning, or do you think that they're being paid more, your male colleagues are being paid more for doing the same job? 3 in 10 women said they didn't know, and another 3 in 10 said they think men are being paid more for doing the same job. So pay discrimination is much more widespread than people think, and it is very much hidden. It goes below the radar, and because we have this culture of pay secrecy and a lack of transparency in our workplaces, it can just persist. It's very easy for it to remain a feature of our workplaces. And as you know, the gender pay gap is related but different. That's the average difference between hourly pay between women and men, and it has multiple causes. And one of the challenges with this issue, which you're just feeding back with your session from the workshops, is that you've got structural inequality and structural causes of that inequality in the workplace, but you've also, alongside that, got individual discrimination against individual women and an individualised right to equal pay. So you've got the emphasis on the individual in the legislation, but you've actually got structural problems in the labour market. you know, the unequal impact of caring roles, the way we channel women into certain roles and men into other roles, all of these things create those sort of structural inequalities in the labour market, and that is all wrapped up into that gender pay gap average figure. But what we've really got to do is to shine the light on pay discrimination and to get the law to work for women so they can actually achieve equal pay, because at the moment it just cannot deliver. It's basically written in a way is to make it impossible for women to challenge to get equal pay unless they go all the way to a tribunal. So our legislation would also give them a chance to get that information up front, resolve the case with their employer, and to avoid having to go to tribunal, which I think is in everyone. Where we go next, I think in the context of COVID, there are a couple of really important things in terms of where we go next. One is we can literally see day by day with the evidence that's being produced, the IFS, Resolution Foundation, our own evidence, that it's getting worse for women. So women are more likely to have lost their jobs, more likely to have given up work, roughly equally furloughed, but in terms of likelihood of being in paid work, 9 percentage points less now likely than men to be in paid work as a result of this crisis. We're seeing hugely significant differences in terms of the unequal impact of caring roles. So yes, some dads are doing more, but actually if you look at overall who's doing the most within households, it's still overwhelmingly women. And then we're seeing the impact of which sectors in particular have been closed down, and those sectors are very female dominated, so tourism, leisure, retail, and so on. So all of these issues are coming exactly at the same time, and this is what's really worrying in terms of prospects for equality. So it's going to mean that we need big government intervention. We just like we've had with the furlough scheme, we need something bold and ambitious to support women, both in terms of their future work prospects, but if we're not in terms of closing the gender pay gap and addressing unequal pay.
Sorry, Sam, would you mind just wrapping up now, please?
Okay, I'll just wrap up. One thing I want to chuck in is childcare. So the other big issue we've got is the fact that we are likely to see 150,000 fewer childcare places as a result of this crisis. Overwhelmingly women work in that sector, so it's women losing their jobs, and it will mean that there's no childcare infrastructure to support women returning to work. So we're calling for a major investment in our care economy in childcare so that we can actually get women back into work in a sustainable way.
That was excellent. I feel really bad just stopping you then, because I could just listen to, no, seriously, genuinely, I could just listen to you for the rest of the day. And I really respect the point that you made about how grueling it is, the prospect of, even if you're in a union, pursuing a claim. So thank you very much. Thanks again, Sam. I need, just for the purposes of time, just to move on to our next speaker and introduce Dr. Jo Grady, who's the General Secretary of the UCU, University and Colleges Union. UCU is the largest post-16 education union in the world, representing members who work in further education, higher education, adult education, and prison education. Jo was elected as General Secretary last year. Sorry, excuse me. The election delivered a record turnout and gave Jo a huge mandate to campaign on important issues for the union, including issues of migrant justice and a hostile environment, eradicating sexual harassment and violence, closing equality pay gaps and fighting discrimination, and engaging in industrial action to secure employment for casualised staff. The union has also grown in membership by 6,000 during this period, which demonstrates that when the union campaigns on issues that are important to workers, that they want to join. That they will join. Before becoming UCU General Secretary, Jo was a senior lecturer in industrial relations at the University of Sheffield, where she taught and researched issues related to gender inequality across the occupational life course, with particular reference to career progression, pay and pensions. Jo will discuss the UCU's work on equal pay in the FE and HE context, exploring the key challenges for the sector. Okay, Jo, thank you very much, and over to you.
Hi, and hello everyone, and thanks for sacrificing what is a lovely day to sit inside. So I wanted to speak a bit about pay gaps, but I did want to speak as well about how they connect to other structural and systemic inequalities, obviously with reference to the education sector. Now, we know due to gender pay gap reporting that there are some really big pay gaps in education. I've picked out some highlights for you. Furness College has a median gender pay gap of 38.5%. Loughborough University has a median pay gap of 35.7%. This has actually gotten worse since 2017. And just before I logged onto this call, I got news that in further education, the gender pay gap has increased by 3%. And in higher education, for any of you who are connected with HE, universities are often encouraged to engage with something called Athena Swan, which is an initiative to close gender pay gaps in universities. But as of yet, we've seen no correlation between the efforts put into Athena Swan and actually improving gender pay. Now, I think before I sort of get onto some of the broader issues, it's probably worth saying that the sector is making some progress on this issue, but it's very slow. It's also based very much on local work by unions. And I think before I kind of move on to discussing the broader issues and how gender connects with other systemic and structural inequalities, I do just want to flag what has been a landmark deal at the University of Bristol this year, which was negotiated by the UCU branch there. So it was the culmination of 18 months worth of work at Bristol, when the union branch there on March 2018 submitted a claim to tackle gender pay at the university. Now, at that moment in time, the pay gap at Bristol was 13.6%, which is actually just below the national average in UK HE of 15.1%. The campaign that they launched in Bristol was a really interesting one, because what they sought to do was actually map out the institution, figure out who within the institution was on committees that could really push forward a gender pay claim. And they started ways of reaching out to them that weren't necessarily through traditional trade union methods, such as public meetings or whatever. So they would hold different types of events and get different communities there. And by the end of this process, they'd really managed to create a culture and an atmosphere in the university where addressing gender pay wasn't an option, or not addressing a gender pay wasn't an option. But they also knew that they didn't want to address it in a sort of a superficial way that just sort of benefited the university's press team. So after a lot of local negotiation, they have come up with a claim which is increasing opportunities for progression for women, greater opportunity to work flexibly or job share, funding for a pilot scheme to allow research staff to continue working at the university between grants, which is when a lot of people in HE lose their work, training for all staff involved in the recruitment and promotion process, and particularly because a lot of women in universities get stuck in professional service and administrative jobs, they were looking at extending the career path for those sorts of jobs as well. So I just want to flag this as a way that when a union can find a way to kind of break out of a sort of its normal bubble of campaigning to a broader community of people, it can push forward claims that benefit obviously everyone in that institution, not just union members. With that said, there are broader problems that I'm, from listening in the reports back that you've just given, definitely map onto higher education. Because one of the main issues that our union has been in disputing over this year is not just gender pay gaps, but equality pay gaps in general, and how they map on to other employment practices within the education sector, particularly precarious and casualised employment. And also the extent to which workloads are intensified. And I think people have already said in this meeting that disproportionately women pick up emotional labour in universities as opposed to their male counterparts. So I just want to kind of broaden this discussion out now to talk about other pay gaps, but also how they are facilitated by other types of employment. So in education, and particularly higher education, who gets a foot in the door, whose face fits, who gets a proper contract, who can stay on through casualised contract is ultimately another cause of big pay gaps. And that's why we have to really look intersectionally at the cause of pay gaps in education, because what we know from research that UCU has conducted is if you're a woman, a Black, Asian or minority ethnic member of staff, you are paid less. You're also much more likely, and in some cases twice as likely, to be on a fixed term contract, an hourly paid or a 0-hour contract. Precarity, low pay and different forms of institutional discrimination, they all compound one another. So just some sort of data from higher education here for you. Women are more likely to be on a fixed term contract than men. That's 36% as opposed to 32%. They're also more likely to be on an hourly paid contract. That's 15% compared to 12% for male counterparts. However, and this is what I've just alluded to, this figure leaps to 42% for BAME academic staff. 24% of academic white men are on a fixed term contract. The figure is 45% for Asian women, and that's the highest group by gender and race. And this has really been what our disputes this year for UCU have primarily been about saying that we have to reduce casualisation and precarity because we have big equality pay gaps, and the way in which they intersect together obviously make this disproportionately worse for certain groups, and certainly is not good for building academic capacity in the sector that is representative of the sort of sector that we want to see. And I think this does map onto some of the issues that you were reporting back from when I joined your call, because UCU's also been doing some interesting research at the other end of the career ladder. So not just looking at precarious and insecure employment and who manages to make it into the academy, but also the staying power of senior professors, and in particular Black women professors in higher education, and the absolutely scandalously low levels of Black women professors in the UK. We were involved in a portrait piece of research earlier this year, which you could probably, if you put staying power into the Guardian, I think it comes up. So I think from us as a perspective as a union, we really need to see, and I think the Conservative Party manifesto did sort of gesture towards equal pay audits could be broadened out to include race pay. These are really important because obviously the data help. Oh, 1 minute left, I can do that. The data helps us put a figure on this and really campaign on it. But what we've learned as a union is that really to move forward on this, we need to burst it into a broader conversation. We need to outline and really find a clear way of communicating what that kind of heteropatriarchal normative employment relationship, how certain people get rewarded. And yeah, that this brings in more than just issues of race and gender, as people have already said, of how people are valued, how people are given legitimacy in an organisation, because that's what we're going to really need to broaden it out and have a kind of a cultural shift to push this forward.
Can you, Joe, I was just about to ask you to wrap up. There you go. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to thank you very much. I'm just going to move on to our final guest speaker. And I must apologise to our BSL interpreters because I'm conscious that we're slightly running over. When I'm introducing our speakers, I'm going a bit too fast, so I'm going to slow down. So our final guest speaker for this part of the conference is Alexia Hendrickson, who is the Senior Campaign Manager at Pay Justice. And Pay Justice runs equal pay claims for supermarket and retail workers across the UK. Since being founded in 2012 by an equal pay expert, Pay Justice aims to provide the tools and information to enable underpaid and undervalued employees to overcome the existing barriers to making equal pay claims. Alexia will speak about the current group action claims that Pay Justice are working on, exploring why group action claims work well for low-paid women and what the role of these types of claims are for winning equal pay going forward. Thanks again, Joe, and Alexia, over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. I have prepared a few slides, so I will share my screen now. Excellent. Okay, so yes, like I said, thank you for that introduction. I will be talking today about the present and future of group action claims for underpaid and undervalued work. In terms of who Pay Justice are, I thought that might be a question in everyone's mind, so I thought I'd take some time to explain that. So as Ian has said, we are a workers' rights group who are formally registered as a claims management company regulated by the FCA, and we run a number of equal pay claims for undervalued and underpaid supermarket and retail employees. We were formed in 2012 out of an equal pay expert's frustration with the non-compliance and complacency in employers' equal pay law. And our goal is to make employment law as accessible as possible to those who need it but might feel like it's out of touch. We work with some of the UK's leading employment lawyers to fight these equal pay cases on claimants' behalf. And our aim is to make it as simple and as easy as possible for supermarket and retail workers to fight for the higher, fairer pay that we believe that they deserve. So as all equal pay cases are, they are rooted in legislation, of course, and our legal partners specifically refer to the Equality Act of 2010 and reference work that is of equal value, so compare two roles that are of equal value. At this moment in time, we are currently running 9 equal pay claims consisting of Asda, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Morrison's, Co-op, Next, Boots, Wilko and TJX, which consists of TK Maxx and HomeSense. And our research states that the total number of employees affected across all of these employers exceeds over 500,000 people in the UK alone. Now, in terms of these equal pay claims, with the claims ongoing, they do relate to the premise that in-store colleagues, who statistically speaking are mainly women, are doing work that is of equal value to their comparators in the distribution centres, who again, statistically speaking, are mainly men. Now, whilst a supermarket cashier may not need as much physical strength demanded of a warehouse role, they are more likely to call on their resilience, diplomacy and communication skills while speaking to customers in store. Now, supermarket workers also have the added responsibilities of cash handling, food safety, and they're also subject to similar time pressures. And I know that we've had early discussions today about the role that supermarket workers have played within this COVID-19 crisis and how valuable we feel that their contributions are to this day. So whilst we believe that these two roles are of equal value to one another, surprisingly, in-store colleagues are paid up to £3 an hour less than their counterparts in the distribution centres. Now, unfortunately, in some retail roles, not all retail roles, but in some retail roles, the inequalities stretch far beyond just pay and also include the in-store colleagues not being offered or offered any at all benefits, such as enhanced overtime rates, Sunday and public holiday premiums, even rest breaks and uniform allowances are something that the in-store workers do miss out on as well. In terms of where pay justice comes in, we fight for the equal pay claims. So the equal pay claims are made in the difference between the in-store hourly rate of the in-store worker and the warehouse hourly rate. And we call that the back pay. So people are entitled to that difference in pay for every hour worked that they've worked historically. Now, under English law, that can go back up to 6 years. And in Scotland, that can go back up to 5 years. So that is the role that Pay Justice play with these claims, is fighting for those rights on behalf of these employees. So another question that I thought people may be wondering is, well, why to participate in group action claims? Why take part in a group action claim when there might be other ways to go about it? So I think Dame Moya Greene touched on this slightly earlier, so I'll repeat that. But there are several features and benefits of these features of participating collectively in group action claims. The first of which is that the claims run by Pay Justice, in my experience, are done on a no-win, no-fee basis. So participating in an equal pay claim on an individual level, on a case-by-case basis, can be very costly and can be quite emotionally turbulent. In doing it through a group action claims, claimants are not asked to pay these fees up front, and there's low risk involved, as if the claim doesn't win, they have absolutely not a penny to pay. And there's less of an investment of time as well. Taking part in group action claims also means that these employees are joining tens of thousands of colleagues exactly like them in the exact same boat as them. So there's a great sense of unity and a degree of camaraderie, and that comes with these types of claims. Another benefit is that there's also a degree of anonymity when you're part of a very large group. It's very, very unlikely that someone's direct line manager or store manager, for example, knows that they are taking part in this large group action claim. Only if they, of course, choose to tell them, that's when they will know. Aside from this, there's quite a minimal effort required for a claimant to sign up to these claims. It's not as emotionally turbulent, like I was saying, and the sign-up process is relatively very quick and simple, and the lawyers do most of the work. And finally, another benefit to group action claims for lower paid workers is that they can seek a sense of comfort and security, knowing that there are anti-victimization laws in place that make it unlawful for your employer to treat you any differently, or to you know, make you lose your job for taking out unequal pay claim. So in terms of where we are now with these equal pay cases, it is important to understand that unfortunately they do take a very long time to conclude. And this is simply due to not only the length of time between the court proceedings, but as another speaker mentioned earlier on, the opposition's quite repetitive decision to appeal each decision that has been made. So as this diagram isn't quite illustrative of my point, but the ASDA case, which is what I've highlighted in green, is the case that has been ongoing the longest because it started first and is leading the way for most of these employment cases. So this started back in the early 2013, I believe, and we are just about reaching the end of stage 1. Now, ASDA workers actually won the first stage of this case on comparability back in 2016. However, ASDA then appealed this decision on quite a few different grounds. So in 2017, the Employment Tribunal, well, the Appeal Tribunal, ruled all of these grounds unsuccessful and again ruled in favour of the shop floor workers. And ASDA have again requested to further appeal this judgment in the Supreme Court, a date of which for that hearing has not yet been set. So you can see that it's a very long process strung out by the employers themselves in order to elongate and make people, well, make it an off-putting process, so less and less people join or in fact drop out of the claims. Whilst this is really frustrating for the claimants themselves, an added benefit to claimants involved is that if they still work at the supermarkets in which they are taking an equal pay case out of, their claim value does grow each day. So every day they are at work and being underpaid in comparison to their comparator, and every day that their employer prolongs the court proceedings is a day that they will be compensated for in the back pay that they are hoping to win. In terms of the future, we hope that a claim win will set a precedent for retail and supermarket pay scales across the board. And we hope that the existence of these equal pay claims will encourage employers now, in the present moment, to rethink their pay practices in the hope to avoid, any legal action being taken in the future.
You start to wrap up, please, Alexia.
Sure.
Thank you.
And this precedent, we hope, will extend even further to other low-paid and undervalued sectors, such as cleaning, catering, clerical and care work, which I know we've also had discussions about earlier on in this session. If this is not the case, we do believe that the law must be enforced, and one way to do that is through legal action. So most large companies can just about tolerate bad press, but they can't ignore legal action. Thank you.
That's great, Alexia. Thank you very much. Can I just formally thank our three speakers? What I'm going to do, just because of time, because we must stop at 1:45, which is just over 10 minutes time, is I'll go straight into the questions we've had. We haven't had many, but what I'll do is I'll take the first one that came in and just ask our three speakers just to respond to this first question, which is from John Page. So it's a question to the panel. The Equality Trust report published today suggests that leading companies are often unable to define equal pay accurately, often asserting that it's limited to paying equally for the same job, when in fact it includes an obligation to pay equally for work, which is not similar, but is of equal value. Does the panel think it is incompetence or willful ignorance? Very good question. Can I open that up to our three speakers?
I jump in?
Yes, Sam. Yeah, please do.
All right. Just really quickly, I think it's sometimes, sometimes incompetence and misunderstanding the law, and sometimes I think it probably is a bit deliberate. I think genuinely, there is confusion about the concept of equal value. You know, I think the more employers I've spoken to over the years, and the more lawyers I've spoken to who try to explain it to employers, the more convinced I am that they just often don't get it. The thing that they don't understand is that you could have two extremely different, very, very different roles that could be valued equally. You know, that you could actually point to and say, this is an equal value claim. So I think that's where, you know, I don't want to point the finger at any particular organisation, but I think we could have had better guidance. I think we could have had better support for employers over the years to help communicate that better. But it's also where a lot of these claims now come from, and they're vulnerable. So, you know, it is really important that they do get it. But I don't think it's all deliberate. No.
Okay, Sam, thank you very much. And Jo?
Hi, I think I would broadly agree with a lot of what Sam's just said. So I suppose maybe just to offer a sort of slightly different interpretation is, and I think it goes back to what I was saying, is it's kind of a real problem with having a bit of a technocratic or a legal argument about equal value, without really asking who gets to ascribe the value and who gets to determine that value, and the, you know, the inherent kind of normativity that goes into that. And I think that that's kind of part of the big problem as well. So, you know, even if you're not accepting it sort of incompetence or willful ignorance, that we need to step back and say that there's an implicit hierarchy of value and who does what in society that is embedded and then given legal status, which in and of itself is deeply problematic.
Sure. No, absolutely, Jo. Thank you very much. And Alexia?
Yeah, I would agree. I think there is a degree of willful ignorance if we do look back to some of the other equal pay claims that have happened either in the private sector or the public sector, specifically when the work is very different but is determined to be of equal value. I know that the Birmingham City Council cases, for example, led a huge movement in that type of work. So I think that does set a precedent for employers to take a think about what it is that two roles do in order to compare them, not just them being like work or the same work. So yeah, that would be my opinions on that.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much. And then a question from, I'll pose the same question again to all three speakers, from Fenella Porter, who was a facilitator earlier on. We've highlighted the value of care work during the COVID-19 crisis, but these care workers are still being paid badly. How likely do you think it is that we'll be able to reflect the value of care work in increased pay? What do we need to make this happen? I mean, that's a profound question, isn't it? But here we are in this conference on profound issues. Perhaps, Alexia, if I can just start with you first.
Yeah, so my stance throughout my speech was about legal action. I think it's one of a very powerful method of being heard. I said previously that you can't usually ignore legal action. So I think that's definitely something that could sorry, I can't speak today, that could be considered. I also think there are other or a variety of different methods that we can take in order for the issue to be really highlighted. Campaigning, I know that we've spoken about this previously before, but I think it is a very powerful message, especially from a large collective group. And I know that particularly we've said today that the nurses workforce in the UK is one of the largest. So I think the collection of those voices can be really, really powerful.
That's great. Thank you very much. And Jo?
Yeah, I think for me, again, to sort of maybe take a different sort of approach, I think we have a moment now to really start a conversation about the importance of digging into sort of social reproduction and who does the labour of social reproduction. And, you know, at the moment we can see that in the UK, in care homes, the face of who does that is often, you know, a migrant Black woman. And actually having conversations about why this work has been devalued for so long, who is able to dodge doing that work because of structural inequalities, why it should be valued, and not because we go out and clap every Thursday, why it should be valued in an inherent sense all the time. And I think that, you know, they're sort of really important conversations that, alongside all of the kind of legal campaigning and claims that can be launched, that really need to happen. And I think that sort of goes back to what I was saying in universities about who gets ahead, what faces are valued, and that's inherently linked to research that we think is important. You know, and that's always Eurocentric research, you know, very kind of like embedded in theories of white philosophy, and there has to be space to open that up, because you know we can do lots of legal claims, but without those sort of broader issues, we're kind of stuck in one route, I think.
Right, Jo, thank you very much. And Sam?
I think this is a really, really important issue, and we focused our campaigning activity this week on the issue of social care workers in particular, and featuring other key workers alongside them, but really focusing the debate about equal pay in the context of the COVID crisis and social care. We've got some campaign actions on our website, so do have a look at that. I'll post the link in the chat function in a minute, but including, you know, lobbying MPs, and we've got some 3 key asks, one of them being, as a minimum, pay everyone the living wage, so get social care workers up to living wage levels. That's quite a modest ask, actually. But also terms and conditions are really, really poor for that workforce. You know, if you get sick, you can't get sick pay. You know, you take 2 weeks off work with the, you know, self-isolating, you won't even get sick pay in that time, so you'll be left without any income. You know, it's absolutely outrageous that our social care system is treating its workforce like that, and it's disproportionately, you know, women and Black and minority ethnic women as well. I think there is a time to change it, though. There is a moment around this crisis that we can use, and this is one of the opportunities we've got. So public opinion shifted. 7 in 10 voters support a penny on income tax to give care workers a pay rise. We published that poll in this week. So I think the public's with us, and we just need to push and lobby hard. And, you know, really it's about putting care work on the same level as other NHS workers. You know, it really should be part of the NHS in any case. So, you know, I think it's now or never, really, as far as care work's concerned. And if we do all push hard and lobby hard on that, we can potentially win it.
That's great, Sam. Thank you very much. And I share your conviction that the public opinion is on our side. And then very lastly, just in the last 3 minutes, a question from Jane Holgate, and I think a good one to kind of end this session on. What can we do to get trade unions and third sector organisations to collaborate on a huge campaign on equal pay? Jo, if it's all right, can I start with you as General Secretary of a big trade union? Yeah, how do we do that thing? Thanks, Jo.
Create more hours in the day would be great. I genuinely think, you know, the one thing that I've learned in the last year is that there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good work, and I think sometimes that leads to a duplication of work. And we're all really invested in trying to do the best for the members of the various organisations that we, you know, run or are involved in. And I think sometimes that means that we don't pay as much attention to making connections or launching those kind of joint campaigns. And I think, you know, potentially events like this can be the start of that, because I kind of feel that a lot of what we do as a union, as UCU, I think maps very much onto the themes that you're looking at today. But we're so busy, and I think particularly in this minute with, you know, the kind of adrenaline fueled rush to just get everything in response to COVID, I think maybe actually the sort of third sector organisations and activists within it kind of firming up what you think you would need and want, and really coming to unions with something quite firm to get behind. Often unions are quite bureaucratic, can move at quite a glacial pace, and actually coming with something that's quite packaged and seeing how it aligns with what we do could possibly be one way that I'm looking at in terms of could work, because yeah, I think there's lots of alliances.
Lovely, that's great, yeah, absolutely. And Sam and Alexia, we've got a minute left, so just a quick response. Sam, just starting with you.
Well, we do work with unions. We've certainly worked with TUC as well. We've got a coalition of 80 women's organisations, including TUC as well, as part of the COVID response campaigning work we're doing. But I think it would be great to do more of that and to have more of a joined up approach. I think, you know, we're a small charity. I've got 12 staff, you know, we haven't got a lot of resource. So I completely take Jo's point about coming with something really worked up, and that's a big proposition. But I suppose I would like a bit of help to help get that right, really, because, you know, otherwise the labour is all on us. And I just think let's all sit around the table together and work it out together, and really up for that. I really would love to do one big joined up campaign with the unions.
Let's hope it might well come out of this event. Sam, thank you very much. And Alexia, just to finish us off, please, just one last quick comment on this. Thank you.
I absolutely agree. I think events like this are perfect opportunities to collaborate together and even just make the connection to have further conversations in the future. And I think, yeah, that could be my summarising comment. I think this is a great opportunity.
That's great, Alexia. Thank you very much. Sorry your time was cut so tightly at the end, but Alexia, Sam, Jo, thank you all very much. I really enjoyed that. I didn't think it was going to go as smoothly as that. I thought something was going to happen. So thank you very much. So what I'd like to do now is move towards the keynote address section of the conference and introduce our two keynote speakers. First, introduce Dr. Anne-Laurie Humbert of Oxford Brookes University. Anne is a reader in gender and diversity and director of the Centre for Diversity Policy Research and Practice at Oxford Brookes University, and is very experienced in gender equality research at national and EU level, and undertakes policy analysis and assessment, as well as work on gender statistics, and is a regular public speaker on gender equality, and she enjoys the opportunity to make connections between theory, practice and activism. I'd also like to introduce Rachael McIlroy from the Royal College of Nursing. Rachael is the Senior Research Lead for Employment Relations at the RCN and responsible for the union's research into pay, terms and conditions and the working environment for nursing staff across the NHS and independent sectors. Anne and Rachel's joint keynote address will provide an overview of the structural obstacles to fair pay through the gender lens of employment. Rachael and Anne will be sharing the findings of their 2020 research, which is titled Gender and Nursing as a Profession, Valuing Nurses and Paying Them Their Worth. Subtitle, Exploring How Women's Work is Viewed and Valued, particularly within the context of the coronavirus. So thank you for allowing me to chair this session, and over to Anne and Rachael.
Okay, thank you very much. You should be seeing my screen now. I'm going to be sharing this presentation with my colleague Rachael McIlroy from the Royal College of Nursing. What I wanted to start with was talking about the gender pay gap in the UK, which according to Eurostat in 2017 was at 21%. We know this, but what we haven't really been talking about today is another aspect of pay and earnings in relation to equality, which is the gender pension gap. And if we look at Eurostat figures for 2018, that is 24%. And I think it's always worth thinking about not only the gender pay gap on its own, but also in relation to other aspects of pay and earnings, because in many ways, the gender pension gap represents the impact of discrimination and inequalities over a lifetime. When we talk about the gender pay gap, as we know, it is either the median or the average pay on an hourly basis, but it doesn't actually represent the extent to which some people in society are completely missing out, and the extent of the gap is just over not only what we have in our pockets on a monthly or yearly basis, but also what we will end up with, and how that might have consequences later in relation to poverty, violence against women, etc. I think talking about the gender pay gap and equal pay is something that is quite important and raises a number of more fundamental questions. And some of the ones that I wanted to start thinking about as we are closing this conference is, for example, how does the gender pay gap relate to different degrees of feminizations across professions? So this is about looking at it from a cross-sectional, so this by which I mean just across different types of profession, but also over time, just how have professions become, has pay become, lower or higher in different professions. And for this, the work that we've been doing in the health sector, and particularly nursing in the UK context, is very interesting, and it's extremely relevant when we are facing this COVID-19 crisis at the moment. Some of the questions that we might want to think about is, for example, is the feminization of the medicine profession linked to a drop in pay? Why is it that as doctors have become more and more women, this has been just associated with just a drop in status and of course in earnings? And is pay in nursing low because it's a profession that is largely dominated by women? And 9 in 10 nurses in the UK and more generally are women, and this is just something that is very, very problematic, and we'll show this in a second.
I'm just going to show you some very, very brief results from a much wider study that I've been conducted at Oxford Brookes University with colleagues and with Rachael McIlroy from the Royal College of Nursing, where we've been looking at pay in the nursing profession and also looking at working conditions. And what's been very interesting about this study is that we've been looking at the gender pay gap in healthcare generally, but in nursing more specifically. And what we found is that in nursing, we don't have a gender pay gap as such. But we're not saying that this means that there is no gender issues at all in nursing. Instead, what we conclude is that even though there is no gender pay gap in nursing, it means that women and men are paid equally badly. It's very noteworthy to see that the average hourly pay in nursing is just £15 per hour. And when we actually see that these are some of the workers that are in the front line at the moment, it is something that I personally find absolutely shocking, and which I think calls for an urgent reevaluation. This said, we don't see differences if we measure the gender pay gap on an hourly basis, but if we actually look at it on a weekly basis, and going back to my point earlier about thinking about what this means in our pockets at the end of the month, but also just at the end of our working lives, what we see in nursing is because of differences in working hours between women and men, we do have differences in earnings. So this is just one of the graphs that we have in the report that we have recently published in January, which shows that, for example, on a weekly basis, earnings for women in nursing are at about £490 a week compared to £585. So a significant difference of nearly £100 a week. So at this point, I'll hand over to Rachael.
Hi, yeah, I'm not going to go over too much the results of the report. You can read that online. There are many findings and analysis in there. I just wanted to take the opportunity to put the report and to put our findings in the context of COVID-19. Everybody today has spoken about the spotlight that's been shone on the health sector, and particularly the social care sector, and the undervaluing of care roles. Taking our report, the findings of our report, and putting them in this COVID spotlight, we see that the crisis has really highlighted the range of tasks that nurses and nursing staff do that's perhaps not been as visible as before until now. That nurses are right at the heart of healthcare, that they're at every stage of healthcare, from testing through to critical care. They're out in the community as well as in hospitals. They're in physical care and in mental health. We've seen the testimonies from nurses over this crisis about what they do, the skills that they contribute, the safety critical nature of their job, but also the risks they face day to day, not just in terms of the catching the virus, but the consequences of speaking up. We've seen that nurses have been reprimanded many times over speaking up over PPE shortages, and that's not new. That they don't feel they have a voice to be able to speak up within the workplace. We've seen the impact of nursing shortages. There just simply aren't enough nurses. There aren't enough care staff, and this in turn leads to an over-reliance on bank and agency staff. So hopefully this leads to nursing roles being more visible, and a re-evaluation of the nursing profile, the nursing profession, and the rewards that nursing professionals receive. So for unions like my own, beyond dealing with the kind of immediate impact of the crisis, dealing with the physical and psychological needs of the nursing staff, and trying to get them through the crisis, we'll be looking beyond this to look towards a better future, to try and unpick some of the inherent problems within health and social care and the working environment, and build a kind of build a better future for nursing and care staff. When we think about pay, when we look at talking today about equal pay, when we talk about pay, though, I think what we come up against, which we talk about in the report, is a kind of underlying unease or cringe even amongst colleagues I work with at the RCN, about really talking about pay, talking about value and worth. Even when, at the moment, when there is a clear need for a well-educated, skilled and well-rewarded staff, there's a real hesitancy amongst the nursing staff and even amongst RCM staff about sort of the dirty talk of pay. And I think that's a real obstacle we need to demolish. But the optimist within me, lots of people today have spoken about building coalitions to a better future, advocating for new solutions, tackling the undervaluing of women's work within broadly and within health and social care, and looking at wider structural issues, looking at health inequalities, looking at the importance of investment in public health, in investment in mental health, and nurses are at the heart of those provision, and hopefully at the heart of that, of talking about that future. So please read the report. There's a lot more there. I just wanted to put that in the context of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Rachael and Anne. That was a really great overview, and I think really puts into context, like you say, the issues that we're seeing now. But what I'd just like to do is attempt to give a bit of an overview of the discussions we've had today, and also to just reflect on, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling right now that they're interested to know what comes next and what people can do to work on this. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview. We've had so many brilliant speakers today, so it's going to be impossible for me to cover everything. But I think key themes that have come up, the importance of collective action, legal action and consumer action together, and also the importance of us working in tandem with one another across the academic sectors, the third sector, within trade unions, within business altogether. The value really, the kind of basis of the value of women's work, whether that's paid or unpaid, the value of the care sector and the value of the labour that women do, as kind of the basis of where the issue of unequal pay comes from. And I guess that was kind of, I can't remember who said it, but someone highlighted the fact that unequal pay isn't really the issue itself, but the issue is unequal pay is a symptom of the problem that is the wider patriarchal, heteronormative, white supremacist society that we live in, unfortunately. So also thinking about tackling the root issues that cause that sexism, as well as specific policy asks and key areas that we can specifically address unequal pay in. Transparency is a very key and common issue that's come up, and that's in relation to publishing salary data with alongside job advertisements, secrecy clauses that businesses often use to silence people, and of course the Right to Know campaign around making available the ability to find out a pay comparator's a potential pay comparator's earnings. Sorry, I'm so tired. And also quite clearly the intersection of issues of race, class, gender, LGBT identities and other issues in terms of thinking about who this actually affects, making sure we're centering those women's voices at the center of this debate, and really thinking about those people when we're making our policies and our campaigns. We spoke about the burden and the onus being on the individuals, and of course COVID, as in terms of the wider women's place in the workplace, COVID as both a risk to setting back the progress that we've made so far, but also potentially looking at the recognition of women's care and unpaid care and the flexibility that COVID has kind of provided a lot of people with at work, with also potential, you know, forward and positive solution. So I won't go on any further on that note. I've just got a couple of the recommendations from our report here, which I think kind of highlight a lot of the things that have come up today. So I hope that people are able to read the report. We'll be sending everything over in an email after the event. One key thing is the introduction of horizontal gender pay reporting. So our report really highlights that companies claim not to have an equal pay problem in their gender pay gap reporting, despite having never really looked into where their gender pay gap comes from. So we think it would be really vital for the government to mandate horizontal pay reporting as part of the gender pay gap reporting. In addition, we would also like to see an extension of reporting requirements to include smaller companies, so those with more than 100 employees, and also including ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting too, so we can really identify where those intersections exist. We've also spoken previously about publishing action plans to make sure that companies are actually able to be held account by their trade unions, and also adopting the contractual right to know policy, which the Fawcett Society have done work on, obviously trying to get that through Parliament, but we're also imploring businesses to actually come out and take action to introduce and adopt that policy within their businesses, as well as eliminating risky elements of reward and pay structures. So that includes, for instance, the importing of previous disadvantage through not publishing salary data, and also overlapping pay grades. So you're obviously all wondering what you can do next. So we're really asking people today to get active online, particularly because obviously we can't be outdoors. So we've tried to coordinate a couple of ways that people can take action, and these are just some of the examples on screen here. So we've of course released our new report today. We're asking people to write letters to their employers. We've created a template and a toolkit that includes that, is online. We have a online action for everyone to contact their MP, and we really ask that everyone can go away and send a letter to their MP today to ask them to stand up for gender pay equality. We're also asking people to speak out online. We have a range of graphics, videos. We have our equal pay calculator, which you can see that's a little clip from it there on the top right of how much you could stand to lose based on the gender pay gap in your company, which is quite a shocking revelation for a lot of people. We have a trade union motion on equal pay that can be passed through people's trade union branches, and also our brand new gallery website, 50women.org.uk, which has the stories of 50 women and their perspectives on equal pay. And we're also asking people to sign up to our mailing list, as well as donating to our organisation, because obviously we would like to continue to do this work, and it takes a lot of time and staff time and money to put on conferences like this, so we would really appreciate that. All the resources are available at that link. Again, I'll send it over in advance. I really ask that everyone keeps in touch over the next coming weeks, months, years, as we continue to work on this. And I would really welcome any emails from people who are sat at home thinking, like, my organisation could do this, we really want to work together. It would be great to continue this sort of collaboration. And I think if you're also sat at home thinking that you know a woman that might be experiencing unequal pay, please use today as a reminder that we all have a right to equal pay, and that they can actually take action. There are loads of organisations like Pay Justice, like Fawcett Society, who are offering free advice and services to help people win these claims. So would really encourage that. And if you're in a position of power, please take this forward to make sure you can read our report and try and implement some of the practices that would really help to eliminate pay discrimination in your company. Finally, we're going to send a link to the feedback form in the chat. Please, if everyone can just take a couple of minutes to just say what they liked and didn't like about the conference, we would really appreciate that. And I think that is everything. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a fantastic morning, and we will speak to you all soon.